Section 3, Video 5. We're going to go out of order here and look at our grouping section of the notes. And that will lead into the questions prior to this. So the order is a little bit backwards, but it is going to definitely be to our benefit to cover these first. When we have four terms, we can do what's called factoring by grouping. And factoring by grouping means we're going to take our first two terms and ask ourselves, what do they have in common? In other words, what's the greatest common factor? And in this case, we have a 5 in common and a k squared in common. When you factor that out, you get 3k plus 2. The second one, you have a 8 in common, but whenever you have a negative in front of that second grouping, I always recommend take that out with it. So I'm not just going to take an 8 out, I'm going to take a negative 8 out. And what happens is, more times than not, it's going to be an advantage, because now when I factor a negative 8 out, I have 3k plus 2. And again, our goal of this, at this part, is to see or have the same thing in the parentheses of both pieces. If I had not taken the negative out, it would not have been the same, they would have been opposite. So I would have had to then take the negative out. So again, more times than not, it's best to take the negative out with the number if there's a negative in this position. Again, the goal is to have the same thing in the parentheses, because now we have one term here and one term here. They both have 3k plus 2 in common. When you factor something out, it's multiplied by what's left. And what's left is your 5k squared minus 8. And it's multiplied together, and this is what you have in factored form. Next one, same idea. However, notice, like we've said before, if they ever have anything in common, all of them now, we should do that first to make it a little bit simpler. And if we do that, we notice they are all divisible by 3. So I'm going to take a 3 out, and I'm going to write what's left. I have x cubed minus x squared plus 2x minus 2. Now, remember this 3 is here. We're going to bring that back later. Now let's focus on the inside and factor by grouping. We have an x squared in common. Take that out. We have x minus x squared divided by x squared is 1. Those, we have a positive 2 in common. Now again, it's a positive here, so we don't have to worry about a negative being taken out. If we do that, we get x minus 1 again. They both have an x minus 1 in common, which is the goal. And what's left is what's in front of each term. Now remember, the 3 was still there, or is still there, and this is considered completely factored. Had we not taken the 3 out first, at this point when we factored by grouping, there would have been something obvious that we should have taken one more thing out, and you could do it at that point, but again, as a rule of thumb, it's best to do it first. Makes it a little bit easier. Next question. 4 terms again. We see if they are all divisible by the same thing or any common or greatest common factor. There are none. So we would focus now on the first two and see that they both have an 8. They are both divisible by 8, and they both have r squared. If we do that, we're left with, if we factor out that 8r squared, we're left with 2r minus 7, because you're taking all the r's out. Next one, the positive here, so we're going to factor out a positive number, and we are going to factor out a positive 5, and you're left with 2r minus 7. If you have the same thing in parentheses, then you did everything well so far. They both have 2r minus 7, so when we factor it out, it gets multiplied by what's left, and what's left is what's in front, and that's 8r squared plus 5. And this ends Section 3, Video 5.